All right, welcome everybody to our latest Live Motocross podcast as we talk all things SMX, MXGP, maybe a bit of off-season racing with the great man Jason Thomas. Firstly, thank you everyone for listening and supporting the site. We really appreciate it. We'd also like to thank our partners in 24MX, Dirt Store, Fuchs Silkaline and Dragon Energy for all their incredible support. As without them, none of this would be possible. All right, welcome JT. How's life? And thanks for joining us, mate. It's still flat out for you, isn't it? Even though it's well into the off-season.
Yeah, busy. Just kind of your focus changes a little bit. You just start working on things you kind of put on the back burner, to be honest. But yeah, I can't complain too much. I'm just full speed ahead, trying to prepare for 2025. Honestly.
Yeah, it's shaping up as a pretty massive year again for the sport. I remember, it rang true the comments you made, how this year was a really perfect storm. And obviously that sort of bore itself out in the nations with so many heavy hitters, lots of guys fit and healthy. Obviously Prado and MXGP and Geyser and Hurling's those battles. And then, what the Lawrence brothers are doing, Sexton, Deegan. There's a lot going on in the sport and it's a really great time. All these heavy hitters, there's a lot of those guys on the older end of their curve that haven't retired yet. So I guess 2025 shaping up as another really excellent year and we got to enjoy this while it's here, don't we?
Yeah, it should be good. A lot's going to change between, I think, now and January, right? There'll be storylines, and I'm sure some people hurt themselves and whatever. We'll learn some at Paris, and we'll learn some more at Australia, and yeah, it's a normal, I think, kind of ebb and flow of the off season. But I think everybody's still trying to kind of enjoy a few weeks off at the moment, right? They'll start getting a little bit more serious November 1, but right now I think is kind of that time where it's nice to have a little debrief and chill out a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And I guess the storylines on the topic of that, they've been ramping up a bit with the Kai de Wolf. Obviously, Lewis broke that news after the Nations that he'd be going to, do some Supercross testing in the US. And he's obviously here. And I guess there was a bit of a frenzy yesterday when he was spinning some laps, doing some whips and, giving us a bit of off-season content as well. So I guess chat a little bit about that as well. Has there been any excitement? And then obviously the natural conclusion, everyone's like, oh, is he going to race the first few rounds like Prado did? But maybe it's not going to be quite like that. But it always makes for interesting conversations, doesn't it?
Yeah, I honestly haven't heard anything other than he wants to ride some. So if he's here or what he's doing or when I don't know any of that stuff. And I really haven't been chasing it. Like, it's for riders to come over and turn some Supercross laps to me. I kind of just shrug my shoulders like, no big deal. But like, I haven't heard these here. I haven't heard anybody spot him riding or anything like that. And I would fully expect him, at the most, maybe he would ride a couple of rounds at the beginning of the season, but I don't expect him to see him doing anything, even considering doing anything serious until 2026.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And just from your perspective, how difficult is the transfer of skills from motocross to supercross from your own journey, I guess? How did you sort of get the supercross sort of base under you? And, you've done so much in the sport, but that initial sort of supercross step, how difficult was it, one, for you to train and practice on, and then two, to race on?
Yeah, it's a big transition. I think for a rider that has the skill set that Kai does, it's not such a big deal to kind of learn how to ride it somewhat. I think the challenge becomes, how do you stay safe? How do you learn how to race? Because he didn't do the French Supercross Championship. He didn't do all those things. So the tight confines and avoiding the mistakes when it's a race environment, I think, are the biggest challenges, because he just doesn't have any experience with that. So those would be the tough things, like learning how to jump the jumps and, blitzing really big loops would be a completely different challenge. That's a whole different topic altogether. That would take a lot of time. You're even seeing like Tom Bial still at times struggle with that. If there is any weak point in his game, that's still the one where, when the whoops are really big and really burly, you'll see him struggle there. So that, his size would help in that arena. Like, him just being so big on the motorcycle is going to give him more control over it. But I think you would see just the inexperienced mistakes that can come from simply that, not having the experience in those situations on a supercross track.
Yeah, it's obviously, such a daunting thing, especially for those guys hitting whoops like that. And obviously, the 9 whoop thing's a big topic of discussion, the whoops these days. But I guess, what is your take on whoops, mate? Obviously, you see it firsthand. You see the track, you walk them, you see how chewed out they are, how difficult they must be to negotiate in those main events, especially the 450 one, whoever's racing last, and even for the futures. So your take on all the whoops chat, mate, because it's always one that gets the fans rolled up.
Yeah, it's I don't know. For me, I try to take my own bias out of it because it would have been great for me in my own racing to have smaller whoops and easier whoops would have really helped me. But for the racing, I can understand the argument of guys like Reed and these other guys that they want big whoops, right? Because it truly is a separator, and it just adds a really large degree of difficulty to the racing. So I can certainly understand where they're coming from as far as wanting bigger whoops, wanting more whoops, longer whoops. And then I understand Feld's side too. They're trying to keep people healthy, and they have data to support that longer whoops lead to more injuries. And they really tried to track where people are getting injured at, and long big sets of whoops were a contributing factor to that. So that's not good for anyone, right? They don't want people hurt. They don't want people missing series and not be able to participate in their series. So it's a tricky one. I don't know that I have a strong opinion, which I know is not great for podcasting, but I just think it's one where both sides can be right. There doesn't have to be one side's wrong and one side's right, because I think there are very valid arguments on both sides of the coin.
Yeah, well said, mate. It's sort of got to be approached in a sort of measured, balanced way. And, there is so many things at play when these decisions are getting made. And obviously the safety of their stars is paramount to the series being, what it is, and having these guys fit, because I've had a couple of seasons in recent memory where there's just been a decimated field. So I guess listening to your podcast last week, the industry seeding one, encouraged the fans to listen to that. You had some really good points you touched on. And I guess aside from the silly season stuff, which we'll get into later, it was really cool to hear your thoughts on Sexton and the way his mindset must be, and, the sort of an insight into the races and the way they approach their career. They have all the money in the world right now, but they just want to win really badly. And I guess him having Jet, must be so tough, because he was probably penciling himself in for many titles, Sexton, then having to sort of shift the focus and, from being destined to dominate to being frustrated a little bit with the bike, with how Jet's racing and not being able to get the wins he probably thought he would have. So I guess he'll be hard at work in the off season and wanting to get as many areas improved as he can with the starts initially, I'd imagine. So how do you sort of see Sexton heading in?
Yeah, it's one of those situations where he has some things to work on. I think first and foremost, the one that sticks out are the starts. He is not head and shoulders faster than everybody, where the starts won't matter. You could argue he's not even the fastest guy. He lost that little bit of edge that he had on sprint speed, I think, switching to the KTM, and maybe that comes back with another year of comfort level and testing and just being more familiar in his confines. But for him, like we had done a bunch of data collection, and his starts were a big problem, right? His starting position took a serious turn for the worse in 2024. And if you're going to give Jet and Cooper Webb and now Hunter and the return of Eli Tomac and whoever else, you're going to spot those guys' positions on the first lap. Good luck. Right? Like, you may be able to overcome it several times throughout the season, but the law of averages over 17 rounds is going to catch up with you. You're not going to be able to just slice through the pack week in, week out. And there are going to be times when Jet gets to start and is just gone. You never see him. You never even have a chance to race with him. So to me, I don't have the answer. I think that they need to work on his reaction time. They need to work on the clutch disengagement. They need to work on torque off the starting line. They need to work on the ECU mapping, like all those things. I might be wrong, right? But those are the things that I would be looking at as far as where are we missing it? Is it the fuel mapping going from the grid behind the start to going over the start and then hitting the dirt? I've heard that being theorized as far as how Honda has that progression built in is a huge advantage. Or is it just like they changed the engine package for Las Vegas and they felt like that was a step forward? It turned out it didn't really do much at all, right? Like, there was no improvement whatsoever in the practice starts we saw, or in the first moto, right when he got hurt. We didn't see any improvement at all. I also think that Chase's reaction time has not been stellar, but we've seen him get hole shots before, so that those two things are hard to square. Oftentimes you'll see riders who get bad starts. A lot of it is their reaction time slow, their technique is not great, but we've seen Chase on a Honda put that equation together on a consistent basis. So I tend to think that it's either Chase losing confidence in himself on the starts, and that's being compounded by challenges from the motorcycle, But something is going on there. And then I would even further that by saying, Plessinger has gotten pretty good starts this year. So how do they square those two things? Like AP's kind of figured it out, and what is Chase not doing that AP is doing, right? So AP, I think, could look at the bike and say, the bike's not as good as the Honda. I'm not getting as good at starts. And then Red Bull KTM could push back and say, well, look at AP. AP's up front most of the time right now. Maybe not hole shotting, but he's like top 5 most of the time. So his bike's doing it. Why are you not doing it? That's a really tough one. I can understand why there's a lot of frustration on both sides there, but the simple fact is, if they don't figure it out, it's going to be incredibly hard for Chase Sexton to win a Supercross championship next year.
Yeah, you got to get everything dialed, well set, and there's obviously those fine margins. And it's an interesting one with the KTM. You obviously see AP dialing the starts, and Sexton hasn't. Vial's not what he used to be. Hurlings has had massive issues, so they definitely obviously got some things to work on and think about in the off season. And I guess like we saw at SMX, if you don't get those starts, like the Lawrence brothers, even Tomac, they put themselves in really good positions for success. You can have those situations like he did where Barsha landed on him, and that just elevates if you keep getting terrible sort of jumps out of the gate, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I mean, the further you are in the pack, the more traffic you're in. Just the law of averages, you're going to run into more issues. The safest place is at the very front. And you look at the crash with Barsha, things like that are just more prone to happen in traffic. Like, that's just the simple fact of it. And, I'm sure it's just one more reason. I would say that Sexton's not looking at that as being like, I gotta get away from traffic. I don't think he's looking at that. I think he's looking at my first lap positioning. I'm getting killed here because I'm not up front, and those guys are checking out before I can even kind of figure out what's going on. And every single time that I have a good result, I'm having to come from the back. That's probably what he's looking at. But yes, to your point, the traffic and likelihood for crashes and injuries and those things is absolutely a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't sort of do those hangtown rides all the time, which was definitely one of the moments of the year for sure. And I guess you contrast that with Jet, like you were saying on your podcast, the first time you saw him was 2018 Ottabiano, wasn't it? So pretty crazy what he's achieved since. Obviously, his family and the team around him are pretty good at keeping his feet on the ground. And I guess his attitude, he's quite relaxed off the bike where he has that perception anyway. So I guess, like you said, just needs to avoid any pitfalls, and he's well and truly on that upward trajectory to be one of the all-time greats. If not, he already is, with Johnny O, Dazzy, Burner, Lars. That Honda framework's got his head screwed on pretty well, mate. So another pretty big off season for him and his brother as well. Big money at play, Paris, AusX Open. So I guess what's your take on the schedule and just the trajectory of Jet Lawrence? And you can even touch on his brother if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the future is pretty darn bright for both of them, right? They're, I think for Jet and Hunter, both of them are kind of in a similar spot where they're, everything's in front of them, right? If you look at where do you want to go as a career, both of them are young enough. I think Jet's ceiling is higher, which I've talked about a lot. But I think for Hunter, he's kind of figured this thing out where he might be able to win some stuff, especially if you factor in, like, things happen, people get hurt, injuries happen. And I think for Hunter, one of the biggest aspects of what works so well for him is he puts himself in incredibly good positions all the time with those starts. And that is such a massive coup for him to have. It's the opposite of the Chase Sexton effect. If you consistently put yourself in great positions, man, good things tend to happen. Like if you're on the pace and you're riding well, and then you also get incredible starts, just the world gets so much easier. Like the ask of what you're trying to accomplish is simply so much easier. So I think for Hunter, this was a breakout year. It's obviously his rookie season, but he certainly opened my eyes to what he can do with his career, because I was kind of like, yeah, it's going to be good. He'll make some money. But I think he really overperformed most people's expectations this year. Like it was a really, really strong year for him. I think he kind of gave Honda's plan. Like Honda was, they moved him up early, right? Like that was way ahead of schedule for him to go to 450 because of the Chase Sexton change. So I think with that in place, he has made good on kind of what they saw in him, right? Like if you're going to make this move, you've got to kind of affirm what they see in you so they feel like they made a good decision. And I absolutely think he's done that. You know, like he did the job of, because sorry, I'm kind of dancing around this, but in these meetings, right, you think about a year and a half ago, Chase Sexton tells Honda, like, hey, I'm going to move on. I'm going to go to KTM. Thank you for everything. They were not prepared for that decision entirely. Like, yes, they heard the rumors. I think they were hoping to kind of keep Chase, but they had to make a decision on Hunter's future and move him up. And I don't think they really had much in the way of expectation for Hunter. It was kind of like, this is going to be a learning experience. Let's make the most of it and stay healthy and just learn. Well, he was the points leader in 450 Pro Motocross for half the season, right? And he was the points leader of the SMX World Championship going into the last round. Like, that's all that is so far ahead of schedule really is kind of where I'm trying to get to, that Honda has to be over the moon. Hunter himself has to be very satisfied with where he is. Is he completely like content? No, that's what makes racers, but he has to be really happy with how it unfolded, because we've seen it not go that way. Look at Aaron Plessinger's early years on a 450. Look at Cooper Webb's early years on a 450. Wasn't great. Like, these guys did not find early success. They really struggled, and it could have gone that way. There was no reason to look at Hunter Lawrence versus like Cooper Webb coming off a 250, Aaron Plessinger coming off a 250. There was no reason to think it was going to go entirely different than that, right? Like, I would have been one that said, hey, that first year, it's really hard to jump into the deep end. And I think early on, I truly think early on, you saw that from Hunter. He didn't qualify at the first round. Then he's, you know, like, he almost won the heat race in the mud in San Francisco, but like, those early rounds weren't great. He was running around 7, 8, 9, 10. That was what I expected. And then somehow, some way, around the midpoint, he turned the corner. He started getting better starts. He really turned it on. I think Seattle was a breakout moment. He won that heat race, and we're like, oh, we might have something here, right? And he found his confidence, and it was gangbusters the rest of the way from there for Hunter. So I have nothing but the highest marks to give him, because I was pretty pessimistic on his rookie year odds. So congratulations, man. The sky's the limit from here. I think you made believers out of a lot of people who, you know, maybe not doubters, that might not be the fair phrasing, but kind of people like me who are shrugging their shoulders going, I don't know how this is going to go. Like, this is going to be tough. And it wouldn't shock me to see some struggle along the way here. So that's for Hunter. It's for Jet. I mean, I don't know that there is a bar that is too high for Jet. And I just watch him ride. I see how good he is all the time, right? And when I say that, I mean, sometimes he is truly untouchable. I believe that. Like, I don't think there's a rider on the planet that can beat him some nights. But even on his worst nights and worst days in 2024, he was still like one of the best, right? Like, there were not any days in 2024 where I'm like, you know what? Those guys are a lot better than Jet. Like, I never saw that, never thought that, never had evidence of it. Never, ever did that thought creep into my mind based off of what my eyes were telling me. Not once. That's very rare. I don't know that I've ever said that about a rider in his early years. Now, once you get established, Jeremy McGrath, Ricky Carmichael, yeah, you have years and years of championships to back it up, and they're a multi-time 450 champ. Oh yeah, we get it, right? Like, you already know. But I thought for Jet to come into his first 450 Monster Energy Supercross championship and do the things he did, where I never, ever felt like he wasn't as good or better than anybody on the racetrack, that's rare air. There's a million different ways to paint that picture, and the stats all back it up. But as long as that kid stays engaged, there's not much that I would put out of his reach. And I know there are a lot of people that don't like that, don't like Jet, want an American to win, that's all okay. Like, those are not things that I subscribe to. I'm just giving you my pure analysis, and there's not a lot that kid couldn't accomplish in this sport.
Yeah, well said, mate. It's great insight. And yeah, definitely agree with what you're saying. There's definitely a lot of haters when it comes to talking about Jet and Hunter. And I guess what you said on Hunter was really ringing true there as well. I guess he probably doesn't quite get the praise he deserves. In another year, he's close to winning a couple of titles, which is just crazy. Obviously, Sexton and Jet are just so elite. But, definitely if you look back to, I guess, this time last year, I guess there's probably chat about, he's probably going to be top 8 in the, Supercross. So to do what he did and sort of have the year he had, he definitely deserves a lot of praise, doesn't he? Because I don't think too many people, maybe even him, saw him being just that good with the progress, did they?
No, I don't think so. I think that he just basically overperformed every expectation and continues to. And if you have an underwhelming expectation, you probably need to just kind of adjust that on the fly here, because I don't see that changing.
Absolutely. And I guess Cooper Webb's always a great, man to discuss. And I remember last year at Paris, we were having a discussion and he looked a little bit out of shape. His riding definitely wasn't great, but he's never a man you can ride off. He's proven that time after time. And he's, I guess, what you call a mentality monster when the gate drops. He's one of those guys you hear about, at Star Racing. He's not always the fastest guy in training and in test track and whatever, but when the race is on, he's on, isn't he? So, and he's a really interesting character. He must be quite a tough man to race against, how he generates that pressure and also perceived pressure. And just he makes other riders unsettled, doesn't he? He knows his game plan, and I guess he's pretty good at imposing himself on his foes as well, isn't he, mate? So I guess he's just a gamer, as we say, and I guess he finds ways to win on deteriorating tracks. So pretty exciting heading into another season of Cooper Webb, isn't it, mate?
Yeah, and for Cooper Webb, he does it an entirely different way than Jet does. Both can be extremely effective, but Webb is never a guy that's going to wow you with raw speed, or he does just something so incredibly visually stunning on the racetrack that you just like sit back in your seat and you're like, oh my gosh, right? That is not Cooper Webb's game. Cooper is a grinder, and he will just wear you down nonstop. And if you do anything silly, you make any sort of mistake, you have any sort of hole in your game, you lose your concentration, Cooper Webb will get you in that moment, right? And I always kind of look at it as, if Cooper Webb is still in the fight at like halfway, if you see the halfway flag and you see Cooper Webb kind of in your peripheral and he's hanging back there, that is a real problem. That is something that you want to get addressed immediately, right? And that's, Cooper knows that. And I would assume his rivals know that, or if they don't, they should learn that, because that is Cooper's game. Of course he wants to be out in front and lead. Like, no, everybody wants that, but Cooper is so lethal late in the moto because he gets the track dialed in. And as the track gets worse and starts to slow down, it's not that his lap times get better. They just don't get worse. Where everybody else they're blitzing the whoops a million miles an hour and hitting these crazy lines, doing all these things. It's not really what Webb does, right? He's using the very insides, and he's finding efficient ways around the racetrack and jumping through the whoops. Well, late in a race, those lines only become more effective, right? The blitzing the whoops a million miles an hour and doing those things get harder to do because the track deteriorates. So they have this really big drawdown in their effectiveness about the way they're attacking the racetrack, where Webb's effectiveness goes up. And it's on a proportionate level, right? Where Webb's peak lap time may be off a second. Those guys that are off 2 seconds, because the things that they were doing to get that elite lap time, they can no longer do because the track won't allow it anymore. So it's this really sneaky, tricky strategy that I don't think it's like exactly how he wants to do it. I think he'd love to be the fastest guy and do all these amazing, visually stunning things, but that's not what he's good at, right? So you have to lean into what your strengths are and do what your God-given talents are. And he is amazing at finding ways to win, finding angles. Where can I make up time in the margins? How can I use these guys, their assets and their strengths against them? And he is incredibly good at utilizing that stuff. So I think for Webb, it was a big year because I think he learned what to do. Like, he learned, okay, I got my diet figured out. That was in the off season. He figured out some stuff within his nutrition that was able to get his weight down. There were some things that he had to do a bunch of blood tests and all these things to figure out, like, he was like, I'm working out endlessly. Like, I'm running and cycling and riding, and I can't lose weight. I'm not eating anything bad, and I can't lose weight. So they really went to work with dietitians and I don't know, all the different types of doctors. I would assume, hormone therapists for blood and all these things to figure out what the hell's going on here. And they were able to unlock something. They were like, oh, that's it. I think he was allergic to something. He told me once that would be good information to get again. But it basically, once they figured that out, his weight fell off. He was able to kind of utilize all this hard work he'd been doing. And that's when you saw this huge jump come in November, December, and then show up in January, because anybody who watched him in like September and November were like, uh-oh, that's a problem. Like, he is nowhere near the pace. And then at January 4th or whatever that was in Anaheim, everybody was like, holy hell, who is that guy? He was in the fight, like, keeping Jet honest until he went over the bars. Like, I thought he had a chance, right? He was hanging around, getting late into that race. He had a chance to win the opener. So that was, I think, a huge moment for him. And he now knows, okay, if I do this training with this diet and this riding, I'll be ready. Is that enough to win the championship? We'll find out, but he'll be in the fight. And that's the most important thing. So I fully expect him to come in ready again. Does he have the same type of A1 performance? I don't know. The track is a huge factor there, because if they build some huge burly set of whoops at A1, that's not ideal for Cooper Webb, right? But over a 17-round championship, I think he's going to be in the fight again. I don't know if it's enough to win, but if you're going to ask me who I think can take it to the wire, just because he'll find ways to hang in there, it's got to be Webb, right? Like, you can make an argument for Tomac. I understand there are more people in this argument, but I don't feel comfortable leaving Cooper Webb out of it.
Yeah, 100% excellent insight. And it's sort of really impressive the lengths these riders go to sort of make themselves the best possible athlete. And they're just so invested in their careers like they have to be, because it's not necessarily the longest careers, motocross careers and supercross. So it's really cool. And yeah, definitely sort of a master, I guess, at exploiting and exposing others' weaknesses and then maximizing his strength, which you explained so well. And a couple more before we let you go, mate. Obviously, the Kawasaki dynamic with what's expected to be Prado and obviously Anderson. It'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. I guess they both see themselves as alphas, and then I guess how do the guys like Barsha, Webb, Tomac, and how do they handle racing Prado? Do they sort of try and put a little flex on him? It's going to be so interesting to see that one play out, isn't it?
Yeah, Prado will be. It's gonna. There was a lot of talk about that at Motocross Nations. Is how does he slot in here? What does it look like for Prado? Is this a learning year, or is he going to come out swinging? Is he going to be a top 5 guy? Is he going to be on the podium? Can he win a race? Like, all those things are great bench racing topics. And if you tell me that you know exactly how it's going to go, I'd probably laugh and say you're lying, because there's no way to. Like, there's no way anybody could possibly know exactly how it's going to go for Jorge Prado. Now, what I would say is the most likely scenario is you're going to see him get good starts, right? They've got some work to do on the Kawasaki. That bike is simply not as fast as his factory KTM / gas is and was. It's not as fast. So they've got some work to do there. But I was kind of going back and forth with Kiefer on Pulp MX show last night, because he's like, I don't know. I don't think he's going to hole shot. And I'm like, there's no way that one of the best starters we've ever seen, ever, is not going to get hole shots now and again. There's no way. Like, he will figure it out, because some of the starts are so short that if he gets a jump, which he's so incredibly good at doing, he's going to be there, right? Okay, if you tell me that they can't get the bike any quicker and he's down on power, and some of the longer starts are in pro motocross, he's not as prominent of a hole shot guy as he was, okay, I can buy that. But I don't buy the fact that you're not going to see him up front on the start. And then what happens from there? I don't think he's going to be, and this is something that Mathis said, was somebody told him they expect him to be a week in, week out top 5 guy. I don't personally expect that to happen. Not in year one. I think it's going to be a lot of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Not so different than what we saw last year. I don't think he'll take outsized risk. I don't think he's going to be like, I've got to stay up here. I've got it. Like, everything's on. I don't think that's how he's viewing this Supercross championship. I think he's looking at it as I need to continue learning. This is a process. I need to get better. And the only way to get better is to stay healthy and stay on the racetrack. Crashing out and doing something stupid not only will impede your immediate learning, but it also severely impacts your chances of pro motocross. And make no mistake, everybody around that program has their eyes set on May, and they should, right? To come out in your first year, there's no way in my mind that they're not looking at it going, hey, we have a real chance to win a championship, so we need to be thinking about that. It doesn't mean Supercross is irrelevant, but we need to make sure that we're 100%, not a lingering ankle injury and, well, we didn't really test enough because we were so locked in on Supercross. No. 100% prepared, right? So that means testing for May right now. And we talked about this on this podcast about where I think he's probably doing some outdoor testing somewhere hidden away on a Kawasaki right now. Then that means also March, sometime in March, you get an outdoor bike and you start riding outdoors 1 day a week, right? So say your typical week is 3 days of riding, which mine was. Some guys only do 2. One of those days is going to be in motocross. And it doesn't mean you have to be just hammering 30-minute motos. It means you're just maintaining your flow, your rhythm, your feel for motocross, the way you corner, all those things, because that is a very different thing than Supercross. Like Supercross, a lot of stop and go, and you cut down early in corners. That's not what motocross is, right? So maintaining that quote-unquote feel for motocross will be very important for him. And then just when you show up May 27th or whatever the hell that day is, you should feel like you're the most prepared guy there. That's it in the end. Like you just want to be the most prepared guy. And if Jet's battling for a Supercross championship in Salt Lake and Tomac is too, all the better. Because guess what they weren't doing? They weren't riding motocross most of the time like Jorge Prado will be at that time. So there is a plan that I think there is to be put into place. But it all kind of starts right now, right? It's get that base in, do your thing in Supercross, but always in the back of his mind, I think he should be thinking about motocross the entire time. And you can be doing both of those things can be happening at the same time. I just don't think the level of all-in and Supercross will be or should be the same as a guy like Jet or Webb or some of these other guys.
Yeah, absolutely. There's really good points you make there. And the prediction's probably spot on because you look at, guys like Mookie and Christian Craig that are veterans and, they will be battling around that sort of 7 to 10. So it's no mean feat just beating those guys. And just quickly on those two, mate, how do you think Christian Craig does on that Yamaha? Obviously, he'll be a lot more comfortable on the bike. He's, been quite vocal about how much he's had issues with that bike and then he had the injury. So I think it'll be a nice sort of refresh for him, won't it, mate?
Yeah, it'll be, I don't know what to expect from Christian Craig. I think it's going to be a sigh of relief for him to be on a bike that he wants to be on. But I think there's like a little bit of hidden pressure in there too, as far as, he's been unhappy with the Husky. He's been vocal about that kind of behind the scenes, but now he's on a bike that he wants to be on. And there's really no excuse left, right? Like if you go out and do the same thing, then everybody's going to say, okay, well, was it the bike or was it you, right? And I think he's at a point of his career where he, most people aren't looking for a championship. He's not going to be like highly paid at Monster Star Yamaha. Part of his responsibilities will be to help and coach Hayden Deegan into the 450 class. So that, there are things to lean on there. But I'm more curious than anything with Craig, right? Because I think he believes and people in his corner believe that when he gets on this Yamaha, wait till you see what happens. Like just watch and you're going to see all the things that you wanted to see from Christian Craig. You're going to see those show up. So maybe they will, right? Like, I don't know. Who am I to say they will or won't? I'm just very curious to watch the show and see if that actually comes to fruition or not.
Yeah, it's going to be great to watch for, that's for sure, mate. And, he's a master in, on those training programs as well. He's done Alden, he's done the Star, he's back on the Star, and he's obviously been helping Deegan. So, to see him, I guess, another podcast for another day, we'll chat about training programs, mate. But before we let you go, it'll be, a little bit of an off season now. Obviously, you've got a holiday coming up, mate, definitely well deserved. And I guess as we close out, any favourite sort of memories of the season? What's the state of the industry like from your perspective? Any sort of final thoughts before we let you go, mate?
Yeah, favorite memories, I don't know. I mean, it's such a long season, right? Like I truly just kind of love being there. Yeah, I think Aaron Plessinger getting that win in San Diego was huge, right? Like that's hard to kind of look past. Um, there's a lot of cool moments, like him having the red plate and then keeping it the next weekend. How truly excited he was to do that. I thought the battle in Seattle. I just made up a phrase there between Sexton, Webb, and Jet was just phenomenal to kind of watch unfold. Like Webb just outduels everyone, and so you see the youth and the immaturity of Jet forcing it when he didn't need to, right? That was on full display. So I don't know, just a great overall season. But in the end, if we fast forwarded 10 years, it's really hard for me to not look back and say this was the beginning of the Jet Lawrence era. That's really hard for me to get past.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Well said. And yeah, really appreciate you taking the time again on this podcast as you have throughout the season, mate. It's been really good getting your insights, and we'll keep these going in the off season, maybe one in Paris or whatever, mate. But yeah, definitely before we let you go, we'll thank our partners in 24MX, Dirt Store, Fuchs Silkaline, and Dragon Energy for all their support, as without them, nothing's possible. So thanks again, JT. All the best and enjoy the weekend.
All right, mate. See ya.
No worries. Have a good one.